DK, your best wingman. Grow with DK. Searching for World Mediation Deacon.
Delcy Lagones de Anglim.
Hello, Assalamualaikum. Selamat petang, selamat pagi, namaskar, 大家好, konbanwa, happari, ommani, patem, annyeonghasimnika. Welcome to the third episode of World Mediation Deacons. This is DK. I'm thrilled to have my guest today. Her name is Delcy Lagones de Anglim. If you need one international mediator in Southern Hemisphere, she is the one. Also, she is a daughter of Inca and España, mother of Australian mediation industry. She was born in Peru, lived in Italy, France, Switzerland, Cambodia, and now she's living in Australia. Truly multicultural and global mediator. Hola, Delcy. Welcome to the show.
Hola, DK. Thank you so much. I wish I could say hello in all those languages that you have said. That is amazing.
Thank you so much. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. My complete name is Delcy Roxana Lagones de Anglim. As you said rightly, I was born in a little town in the Andes in Peru. You have to cross 5,000 meters above sea level to get to my little town. So it's a very difficult path there. I was born there and I lived there until I finished school. Then I moved to Lima, the capital city of Peru, to become a lawyer. At the tender age of 16, I started my law studies and I became a lawyer and worked in the international trade law area for some time until I won a scholarship and went to study my post-degree studies in Europe, initially in Italy, and then lived in Geneva, as you said rightly, briefly in France, and then in Cambodia, and now in Australia, yes.
So you started as a lawyer and you stopped practicing and went to study in Europe. Am I correct?
Correct. I won a scholarship just some 2 years or 3 years after I started practicing as a lawyer. And it was a very exciting experience because I was very young. So I started university very young. I finished very young. And it was a huge experience. It was the first time I left my country and my family to go to study in Europe. So it was an adventure. It has not stopped, of course. As you said, I've been everywhere now.
When did you start practicing again?
When I was a lawyer, you actually never stop practicing because if you don't have a client who comes either by somebody, it is either a cousin or an auntie or an uncle or a friend or your neighbor, because they know you are a lawyer, they're constantly asking for advice. So in a sense, I never stopped practicing. But when I came to Australia, I trained as a mediator in 1994. And I was thinking, this is really interesting and exciting. But at the time, not many people understood what mediation was. I, in fact, graduated from university with international arbitration. And at that time, even arbitration was not very well understood. So can you imagine then mediation? It was very often confused with meditation.
Yes. Correct.
In fact, my first client came and said, I would like to book for a 1 hour appointment. And I said, that's very interesting how she knows just 1 hour. But anyway, I just said, okay. And she was a lovely lady. And I said, yes, this day at this time. So she arrived and then she was with very nice, comfortable clothes. And I said, and then very quickly, she said, how do we start? And I realized, oh my God, this is some misunderstanding. And then she said that she came for a meditation class.
So did you teach meditation?
Look, later on, after working as a mediator for some years, I realized that the practice of mediation is actually very stressful. You don't have just one client. When you're a lawyer, you have one client and you give it 100%. But in a mediation, you do have 2 or more clients. So you must give to everybody the same amount of time, of consideration, of effort, everything. So when you finish, It is quite an enormous effort. You put everything in that to help parties to get an outcome. So I heard a colleague of mine actually in Paris. He is a very well-known mediator from the US who practiced 5 minutes meditation before he started his mediation processes. And I thought that's quite interesting. How does he do this? So anyway, I had the opportunity to meet him, and his name is Jason Meek. He's a professor now in the US. And one of the things he teaches is this being in the moment. Even when the clients are there, he asks them, it's not a proper meditation, 1 hour meditation. It's just some minutes to help them reflect why they are there. And you just look inside a little bit. And he gives them 2 minutes. And also he takes that opportunity to just be in the moment. And then he's very effective. And so then I took a meditation class later on to learn how to be helped, because as you can understand, when you have a mediation, people are already in conflict. They are probably in difficult emotional situations. So imagine if your mediator is also a bit agitated, it doesn't help. So I realized that you must be very calm. As a mediator, you have to build this environment, which is really a good environment for parties to speak honestly, and then you able to listen to them properly and help them identify their needs. Because sometimes people know when they come to a mediation what they want, but they really don't. So sometimes, as in your practice, that you, through the mediation process, they understand maybe this is actually what I want. Not X, but maybe Y. So it is interesting how mediation and meditation, sometimes you have to use that.
It's quite interesting because I do meditation and I use Insight Timer as an app, and there are great teachers in the app, and every early morning I do meditate. And interestingly, it is very good for controlling my emotion, and mediation is controlling the party's emotion as well. The most interesting thing is 2 weeks ago I interviewed Manong, and Manong mentioned that she does meditate before mediation, and she
Correct.
used the same app with me, Insight Timer, when we have used the same teacher. So I was very surprised. And mediators do meditate. Not only spelling is similar, but the content is quite similar. It's quite useful. And you use meditation, and other mediators do meditate.
Yeah, it is. There are some countries, Bhutan, for example, I was reading that they actually encourage children from primary school practice meditation actively, because they measure the happiness. They have a happiness index. Other countries measure the success of the economy in a different, like income per capita, etc. But not in Bhutan. My understanding is that they measure it for happiness. And one of the tools they use is meditation.
So you studied in Europe, but what's up in Cambodia?
Yeah, I got a job with the United Nations in 92. I was very lucky to have been one of the first civilians, because normally the UN would have missions in post-war countries, and they will send just military personnel. But in Cambodia, they decided for the first time to send a civil component. And I was very lucky to have been chosen as one of those people that we arrived and work with the United Nations for 1 year in Cambodia to rebuild the country, to give civic education, to resolve disputes. So I was the representative at the district level, and it was my duty statement was 5 things, and I ended up doing 50,000 things, from helping people to resolve their conflicts about rights and about family matters and things like that, to educate people in and voting and human rights. So it was one of the most interesting jobs that I've ever had, was with the United Nations in Cambodia. So that's when my relationship with Cambodia starts, with the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia in 1992.
That's great experience. You build kind of foundation of Cambodia. Modern Cambodia.
It was very kind of you. I don't think so, but it was a very difficult, very challenging job, but also one that allowed me to understand the human resilience. Despite all the suffering that the people came to experience, they were really happy to continue having faith in each other and then to rebuild, as you said, what Cambodia it is now. It is a beautiful country with very beautiful people. It's a lot of things still to do, a lot of work to do still.
How many years did you spend?
With that particular job, only a little bit more than a year. But I have been back in Cambodia since 2015, working with the World Bank, resolving conflicts between corporations and communities. So this, again, is a different kind of experience, more to do with what we do with mediation. And again, it's a huge learning experience. One of the things that we were going to talk is about multicultural mediations and all that. And I was just thinking, how many nationalities do I have in this particular case? And I came up with around 8 or 9 from Germany, Israel, the US, France, Australia, Cambodia, Vietnam, plus indigenous communities. And then, of course, working with interpreters, because I'm not as clever as you are to do all those languages.
I know nothing about that.
So yeah, to work with interpreters, again, is a different type of training mediators we need to go through, because it's a different process in a sense. But again, really interesting, learning every day, making mistakes, making not so many mistakes later, but
That's great. So which country do you miss most?
listen, I was just thinking about that the other day, because I thought, as you think, where I would like to spend a bit more time. And the truth is, I really love, of course, Australia and Southeast Asia. Korea is a place I haven't been yet, but I really would like to go and visit. But I would be comfortable where there's nice food and nice music. Being South American, Peruvian, and I can see your cello behind you. We learn to dance before we learn to walk.
How to dance without walking?
I don't know. I think our mothers just hold us like this and make us dance or something. But it's just a saying that we like very much dancing and music. And these are very big. We get together very often. So it's part of our makeup as a social group. We enjoy very much getting together and having music and food and people that we love around us.
So you experience a lot of different cultures, and among those cultures, can you choose one culture that you love most?
You're asking me a very difficult question. I wouldn't be able to choose one, but I think in a sense, I experience and I enjoy a little bit of every culture, and it influences me as a person. The person I am today is thanks to the cultures that I have been exposed to throughout my life. And that obviously goes from Europe and South America, but also this region. Australia, I have traveled extensively in this region, and I wouldn't be able to choose. I will make somebody very unhappy if I just choose one country.
Yeah. Can you recommend any music or art of a certain culture?
I will have to be biased and say this Peruvian music, because we do have different regions, and you would have music from the Amazon, from the jungle, which is completely different to the music we have in the Andes with the pipes and the charangos and different instruments. And in the coast, we will have a mix of Creole music, which includes African drums and Spanish influences. So it's a very rich country with the different, any kind of music. And of course, then we have salsa and all these more famous type of music and dance. Yeah.
You dance tango?
I have tried unsuccessfully to dance tango. Yeah, but I actually used to dance the traditional dance of Peru is marinera. It's a traditional dance. And I used to compete on that dance nationally. And it was one of the distractions. It always was present for me. When you compete in this kind of dances, you have to train 4 hours a day.
Thank you. Why don't you go back to the mediation part? You experienced plenty of multicultural mediation. Can you pick one of the most diverse multicultural mediation you have ever had?
I was just referring to the one that I done in Cambodia with the indigenous communities and Vietnamese. It's around 8 different cultures altogether. And it has been very challenging because as a mediator, as you have to not only be impartial, but to appear to be impartial, but also you have to cater for the needs of each party. So when you have a multi-party mediation and it's multicultural, you can imagine the amount of work that we have to do to understand each culture, but also to do the right thing by that particular group. So it's been a very beautiful learning experience for me. And it also goes to the learning of the languages, which I have from very early on. I decided that if I was going to have a client from a different culture from mine, then I would pay the respect to this party to at least learn how to say hello and thank you in that language. So I would be days before learning how to do through the beautiful internet these days and Google and YouTube. I will be searching how do you say hello and goodbye or whatever in that particular language. And that, I think, has allowed me to understand how do you successfully can work with people of different cultures. Because it's about, at the end of the day, I think, to go to the human part of it. Even working with corporations is not like you are talking to a building, because even the biggest corporation has a person like you and me representing that corporation. So you must understand where this person is coming from, not only the culture, but other things that makes this mediation process good enough for these people to trust me as a mediator, to share their stories. Imagine you go almost to a complete stranger and start telling your story. So the more you understand where this person is coming from and the more you make them at ease, then it's a much simpler process to try to have that interaction and then to achieve that understanding with the person that you're talking to.
I see. In that mediation, how many co-mediators were there and how many interpreters were there?
Was the only mediator. I had 3 interpreters and a 4th one who was just the indigenous interpreter. This amazing lady speaks 7 indigenous languages. And so she's like a jewel. But then, of course, I had the other 3 interpreters. It was interesting because as English is not my native language, it's a Spanish. So you can imagine, this is a non-English native, but I'm communicating in English with all the parties because it's the common language for all of them. So the interpreters will be doing from this language to English, from this other language to English, and from English to that other language. So that as multicultural as you can get, I think.
Wow. How long did it take?
Oh, too long. Initially, we thought it was going to run just for 6 months, but it ran for a little bit longer, mainly because of for these different factors. It was difficult. Can you imagine get everybody, just to have 2 or 4 people in a mediation, to organize that is difficult. Imagine if you have 85 people.
If that case goes to the litigation or arbitration, it may take 100 years.
Yes, very complex situation, but it's one of the highlights, I think, of my career to have been a mediator in that context.
So 8 different jurisdictions and 85 parties and 3 interpreter, and you mediate by yourself. That's amazing experience. Was it finally resolved?
Yes, we are of the view that it was considered a landmark case, and one that deserves some studies from some researchers, because they wanted to understand how this process assisted or not the social fabric of these communities, because they are doing something they are not normally used to do. So there was a lot of challenges there. It's still going to be some time until somebody writes about this, and because it's confidential, I'm trying very carefully not to say too much.
We'll not ask when was it happening. Thank you very much. I believe that might be, as you mentioned, one of your best memory as a mediator. And as you already explained your best memory, can you explain one of the funniest memory or worst memory as a mediator?
There was a mediation I did here in Australia, and I had 2 parties who came from Africa, and the lawyers representing these parties were Australian, and I was the mediator. I researched a little bit more about this particular country. I learned how to say hello, goodbye, thank you, that kind of thing in these languages, which I did at the beginning, and the party was a bit nervous. When I got there, I said these words in their language. They just burst in laughter. Because I probably said something not quite right.
Is it Swahili?
Yes. So then I said, I'm so sorry, but it broke the ice a little bit. And when we were in the private sessions, they said, oh, this. And I said, look, if we get an agreement, I promise you, I will sing a song in Swahili. Huh? They said, oh, one. I said, well, when I was studying in Italy, I had a colleague, a friend of mine who was from Tanzania, and then she taught me a song in Swahili. A very famous song, actually, you might know, it's called Malaika. So I said the same thing to the other party in the private session, and they both but I said it very just casually to make things a little bit lighter. Anyway, they got an outcome. When we got together, they said to me, you said you were gonna, now you sing the song.
That was the behind story.
That was the behind the story.
Can you spare 10 seconds or 5 seconds of that song? Just main rhythm?
Oh, look, I'm a terrible singer. I don't want to offend anyone who really knows how to sing, but it goes, Malaika, nakupenda Malaika. Malaika, nakupenda Malaika. Nami nifanyeye kiwa na mwenzio, nashindwa na malizi nawe, ningekuoa Malaika.
Wow, that's great. It's so touching. That's a very nice song. It's very famous, but it talks about, it's a love song. It is a very, very special song. You are one of the experience of co-mediator as well, based on your IMI profile. You mediated thousands of cases. Was there any unique or impressive co-mediator or mediation advocate? Look, you're right. Co-mediation is not very well known. However, in my view, it's probably one of the best models of mediation. In Australia, I was trained as a co-mediator many years ago, and it was done basically at the time because community mediation was very popular. So we were not doing commercial or any fancy mediation, just this neighbor, his dog is barking, or the tree fell on my house, or something like that. So for that context, the community mediation, the co-mediation model was in place. And it will be
if you had one male and one female parties, then you will have a one male and one female mediator, always trying to reflect the parties coming to mediation. So if there were two men, then you will have two male mediators and so forth. So to choose actually a co-mediator was so important because my first experience with a co-mediator was not very nice. This co-mediator was very experienced, and then he thought that he knew more than I was, and I was just starting, and it was very difficult to work with this person. And so I thought, this is like you're fighting with your co-mediator. It's not a good idea. Not a good example. You already have two warring parties and you have your co-mediators fighting. So it's really crucial for me to meet with my prospective co-mediator and understand, can we work together? Do we have the same style? Do we have the procedure of the mediation? Because if you're a solo mediator, you can adjust. When you have another person working with you, you have to prepare. You have to prepare really carefully, to the point that you have to know what the other person is going to be in charge of doing. You divide roles, etc. So it's a whole training process. It's not just that you sit with somebody else and let's just co-mediate. And there is a lot of assumptions also that one should be a leading mediator and the other will be just the one that follows. That is not the case. In a real co-mediation model, both mediators are equal in every respect. So as you can imagine, it is not easy to find a co-mediator that can work successfully with you. But with this long answer to your question, of course, I have come across with wonderful colleagues here in Australia. Mr. Thomas Tudulka, for example, is a great friend of mine. Once you find a co-mediator, also becomes your friend. That is very often the case. And then, of course, Mr. Jason Meek from San Francisco, the person I was referring to at the beginning, but many others that I consider great mediators.
Thank you. So it seems like the co-mediator have the same style, then it might be helpful. But the first time co-mediator might be very difficult because you don't know her style, and you need some time to get used to her style. So it seems if you know the co-mediator very well and you can work together, have experience, then it's good. But otherwise, it might be not recommendable because sometimes it could be good, sometimes it could be bad. It depends on the relationship and chemistry between co-mediators.
Correct. You are very right. That's exactly the situation. Yes.
I see. Was there any experience about mediation advocate as well?
I don't call it mediation advocate because sometimes the concept or the meaning means that this person is advocating mediation rather than a lawyer representing a party in mediation, right? I understand that a lot of organizations, including IMI, we use mediation advocate. I'm trying to think what will be the better term for that, but it can be mediation counsel, or like in arbitration, we don't say arbitration advocate, we say arbitration counsel. So I'm trying to think what will be the better phrase, the better term to actually explain that this lawyer represents this party in the mediation process. So for this, it is very recent. At the beginning, lawyers in particular were excluded from mediation processes. It was almost like an automatic rejection of lawyers being present in mediation, even here in Australia.
Oh, really?
I believe I was one of the first mediator practitioners who invited and allowed lawyers in the room because it was not traditionally done so. Normally because the view was that lawyers will make a big problem, that instead of helping, they will hinder or they will stop an outcome from happening. This is just very instinctively the opinion of the majority of mediators as well as the clients. So when in Australia, the Family Law Act changed and made mediation compulsory for children's matters, then I realized that there's going to be a big problem with parties not being represented by lawyers in the mediation. Because as a mediator, although I am a lawyer, I cannot give legal advice. So I started thinking how would be best to include lawyers in these processes. And so I started just talking with my clients first and saying, look, first, have you received legal advice? They will say mostly yes. And I will then ask, do you know what your rights are, etc., etc. And they will say, yes, not really. Yes, I can call my lawyer if necessary. So then I would say, would you like to have your lawyer next to you? The client will say to me, oh, is that possible? I said, if both parties want to, then of course it's possible. This is a party-driven process, and I want to do the best for you. And although I'm a lawyer, I cannot give you legal advice. So it will be good if you had your legal advisor with you. To my surprise, that this first case, they both said yes, and they brought their lawyers. Of course, then I realized that these lawyers are not familiar with the mediation process. So how to educate them and to make them understand this is not court, this is not an adjudicative process, it's not obviously arbitration. And it was really interesting because a lot of lawyers were really keen in learning this new mediation. It was the law. They have to comply with this. So what happened is I just started having a lot of coffees with a lot of lawyers.
When was that? Is only 2000?
That was 2000, and the law, I believe it changed in 2004. From 2006 to 2009, there was a lot of changes. It was a gradual change, but the lawyers really trying to understand what is this new process. So when they felt that they could actually participate actively in this mediation process, I became very popular with the lawyers because they felt that initially they were excluded of this process. But I think when you work together, we are all on the same boat. This is, I always say to my students, and when I train, I said, mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, we are all in the same boat. We are all trying to help our clients to resolve their conflict. So we need to have an understanding of each other's roles and respect for each other's roles. It's not that initially the lawyers thought that we were stealing their jobs from the lawyers. Then they were saying, oh, now there's no jobs for us because now these mediators are going to take all our jobs from us. And to my view, of course, is that mediation cannot be used for every conflict. There are some conflicts that require somebody to make a decision for them. So then you need an adjudicator. You need either an arbitrator or a judge or somebody who makes the decision. So the people who think that mediation is used for everything is it's a misperception. So in my view, every dispute has a dispute resolution process, which is sui generis for this kind of conflict and dispute. So yeah, I think I'm lost in the question. What it was, DK? I forgot.
Oops.